Good evening, everyone. We are back in our study in the book of Jonah or Jonah. That's the Hebrew name. And we ended yesterday in verse 16 when after the men in the boat threw Jonah out of the boat and God made still the sea. Now, in verse 17, after Jonah was thrown into the sea, it reads this, the Lord, and every time you see the capital Lord, this would be Jehovah. Now, he had prepared a great fish to swallow Jonah. And Jonah was in the belly of the fish for 3 days and 3 nights. Now, one of the challenges we have in the book of Jonah is that there is a lot of usage of imagery and a fair bit of poetic expressions. And so in verse 17, we would see this. Now, God has prepared. The word prepared is better understood as appointed, right? Appointed. Meaning he had found a fish, and decided that the fish would play a role. That's the meaning of this English word prepared, at least in the Hebrew. And as it went on, I think you can understand the word great here is not great merely as in strength, but great as in size. Now, this word fish, it literally means fish, right? With a tail. And the whole idea of this word is to give us the impression that it is a large sea creature like a fish. Now, one of the things that we have in our modern day mind is that whenever we read the word fish, it has to be in our modern day classification of fish. In the Hebrew, there is one word, dag. And dag means literally an animal that has a swimming action using a tail. That's basically, the wagging of the tail back and forth. That is the description of this animal, which in English we translate as fish. So don't think of it as just a little fish, but it's a great big fish, and possibly we may not have seen it, right? And it swallowed Jonah. The idea of swallow is to engulf. And so it appears that the fish has a huge mouth. And the moment the mouth is open, everything gets sucked into the fish. And that was how Jonah was sucked into the fish. Now it says here he was in the belly. Now the word belly literally means the inward part. Right? Inward part. Or the bowels, the very inside part. But generally, what you can see is that in Hebrew, they don't need to explain what's inside the animal, but very much into the well, I guess you can call it the stomach, the abdomen, right? Of the fish, of the dag. That's the name, the dag. And he was there for 3 days, and this is one word, and 3 nights, another word. 3 days and 3 nights needs to be understood as the bright part of the day and the dark part of the day. That's one way, right? 3 parts of the bright part, and 3 dark parts. Now, in Genesis chapter 1, in verse 5, in Genesis chapter 1, let's see. In verse 5, that's right. We find that God called the bright part day, and God called the dark part night. Basically, Yom and Lila. And what could constitute this idea is that it would be, well, I guess in our modern day, 3 days. And in the Hebrew context, the Hebrew day begins in the evening. And the way it reads itself is that we're talking about 3 brighter part and 3 darker part. And that was how long Jonah was in the belly of the fish. When we get to chapter 2, verse 1, Jonah prayed to the Lord his God from the fish belly. Now, one of the things that you notice is that this word pray, it is to intercede. And he literally prayed. Now, one of the things that you need to understand is that he is not kneeling down. And I don't think there is that kind of a space, but basically it describes the action and not the posture, right? And the direction that he was praying to was to Jehovah, his Elohim. And the idea that we have here is to ask God for something. And that's the word pray, to supplicate. And this is what he said. He said, I cried out to the Lord because of my affliction, and he answered me. Out of the belly of Sheol I cried, and you heard my voice. Again, you need to understand that these are all some of the more poetic style of speech. And so you notice that this whole passage, 1 and this one here, this is an A and this is a B. Both of these statements are actually talking about the same thing. And so it has an emphasis. That's why it's speaking twice. And so he cried out to God. He called out, right? Called out loud to Jehovah because of his distress. He was in a tight spot, literally tight spot. That's what it means by affliction, being pressed together. And so he is physically in that sense, in that situation. And he says, and he answered, and God responded to him. That's one part. The second part is this. Out of the belly, and this literally means from the belly, the abdomen of Sheol. Sheol is the, I guess it's in the Hebrew mind or in the Near Eastern people, whenever a person dies, the person goes to the afterworld. And the Hebrew word for the afterworld is called Sheol. But in this case, he is almost there. So it says, out of the abdomen of Sheol, I cried. And this word cry is different from cried out. So English is a problem, right? This word here for cried means to shout for help. And the second part here is you heard my voice. And so here, heard means God actually picked up what he said, and voice is a sound, the sounds that he made, right? And so when you can see this, you can instantly notice my tight affliction is the belly of Sheol. I cried out loud to God. He answered me. You heard my voice. And hence you would see that this is in A and B gesture where two statements are talking about the same thing in slightly different ways with an emphasis. And so what is clear to us is this. Jonah was in a tight spot. And he called out loud to God. And basically for help. Right? He's not calling for anything. So that is the prayer that he is describing now. So it's fairly poetic in that sense. For you cast me into the deep, into the heart of the seas, and the floods surrounded me. Your billows and your waves passed over me. Now again, as we pay attention to the words, you would begin to see the poetry that's coming out. You notice you he ascribes it to God, right? God, you threw me into the sea. And this idea here is to fling me into the sea. Now, in the Hebrew thinking, in the Near Eastern thinking, whenever something happens, they ascribe everything to God. So they ascribe the events to God. But you notice in chapter 1, who flung Jonah into the sea? The sailors. The sailors were the one to do that, and Jonah told them to do so. But in this prayer, he articulates it this way, that it was God who flung him into the deep, because it is a way that the Hebrew people and those in the Near East, they would ascribe good and bad to God, no matter who did it. And so where did he throw him into? The deep, right? The deep. And here, the idea here of the deep means the deep sea. Again, the second line here, you find that it is at the heart of the seas. The heart is the center point, right? The center point of the seas, which is in the sea itself. And so you have this into the deep, into the heart of the seas, an A and a B. Deep into the water. I hope you can see what I'm trying to explain. The next phrase here, it says here, the floods surround me. The idea of the floods surrounding is really streams of water. Streams of water surrounds me. And then it says, your billows. The word billows is, I guess you can say that these are the winds that turns back and forth, or the water, the water that turns to and fro. And your waves, these are waves. It is actually the breaking of the sea. It says that it passed over me. And these are the waves, the billows, the waves, they just overflow. And basically you see this. Jonah was drowning. That's a very, what we call a more picturesque way of explaining. The next verse, then I said, I have been cast out of your sight, yet I will look again toward your holy temple. Again, you find an A and a B. Your sight, your holy temple. The presence of God is always understood as in the temple. A and B, right? And the idea here is he has been cast out, he's gone away, but he wants to come back. And so the status here is that Jonah wants to return to God. So you can see the expressions are beginning to come out. Verse 5, the waters surrounded me, even to my soul. The deep closed around me. Reeds were wrapped around my head. This is all very imagery driven. So let's slowly take it one step at a time. The waters, it engulfed me, right? Encompassed me. And he used this word, my soul, my nephesh, the very being, the part that that describes him being alive. But the water is surrounding him, and that is a description of a person who is drowning. The deep, the tahom, the deep waters closed around me. So when he says closed around me, it means that it is turning. Right? It's turning around him. Turning around. And so it's swirling around, maybe is a good word. Swirling around. So the waters, and you could see this, it's an A and a B, you know, the waters, and he is down here. And so this is a picture of a person who is drowning. So he's describing his condition. The next part here, the weeds. The weeds here is suf. That's the word is reeds. Suf. By the way, this word suf, there is a word in the Bible that we read as Yam Suf. Normally translated as the Red Sea, but it's actually Yam Suf. And Suf may mean weeds, it's some water plants, maybe seaweeds, and in this particular case, most likely seaweeds. And the word saddle, wrapped around, is actually to wrap firmly. Wrap firmly like a turban around my head. And so this is another description, right, of drowning. So this is a picture. These are pictures of drowning. Verse 6, I went down to the moorings of the mountains. The earth with its bars closed behind me forever. Yet you have brought up my life from the pit, O Lord my God. Interesting, verse 6. It says this, I went down to the moorings. The moorings means the bottom. The bottom of the mountains. So the bottom of the mountains will probably be referred to as the seabed. How does it look like? Well, if you think of it this way, if this was the seabed and this was a mountain and you have the waters, and so where Jonah was is just down here. and he is at the bottom of the seabed. He is at the floor of the mountains. That's how the expression goes. And then it says here, the earth. The word earth here is the land. Understand, down here is also land, because that's the original land. And it says the land with its bars. You could say that it is the gates. And so this is a very poetic way of the locks, the gate locks. Behind me, Olam, forever. And what it appears to say that he's going to drop in from the top all the way down and even further down. That's the picture. It is as if that he is not going to come up again, that he is going to be stuck down there, and it is a poetic description that he's about to die. Yet you have brought up my life from the pit. And so the idea of bringing up, this is bring up or make ascend. What does that mean? It is that from the bottom, he is coming back up again. Right? This is ascend. Going down is descend. So the description that he is going to die drowning is the descending into the bottom seabed. And now salvation is about bringing him up. And so this word here is ascend from the pit. The word pit here describes the grave, I would say. Describes the grave. It is the hole of destruction. And so these are being said to be at the threshold of death. And yet God rescued him. So the idea of make ascend, this is salvation. And he praises, O Lord, my God, or Jehovah, my God. When my soul fainted within me, I remembered the Lord. And my prayer went up to you into your holy temple. Now let's break this down a little bit. When my soul fainted, the idea of fainting here is to be weak and be so weak that you faint. Right? That's the idea of fainting here. I hope you can see the picture. That's the idea of fainting, where you're weak, that you just have to collapse. So my soul refers to his nephesh. Now, notice this. There is a me here. Right? Me here. Within me. And this is a description of the person, and the nephesh is inside the person. And so this is the poetic way of describing that part of me that is alive in me is so weak that it's going to collapse. And even at that dangerous time, I remembered the Lord. And this means, remember means brought to mind. It is interesting that whenever somebody is at the threshold of death, they will remember God. And so this is what he says. Yes, I was about to die and I remember Jehovah. And my prayer, and this word prayer is literally prayer. And this is tefillah. Tefillah is actually prayer. And, well, you could say my supplication. my supplication, it went up to you. And where is you? You is Jehovah. And the phrase that is described is your holy temple. First of all, holy means special. So God's temple is special. Temple is Hekal. Hekal actually also means a special sanctuary, like a palace. And so temple has another aspect of meaning called a palace. It's a huge place for people to gather. And so the place where God is in Jonah's mind is that his prayer needs to get to God so that he can hear him, to your holy temple or to your holy palace. Now, in the Hebrew mind, they find that you will have, how should you say, in the Hebrew mind, they have a concept that there is a temple of God on earth and a temple of God in heaven. And both uses the same description. And so when it talks about where God is, right, God is in your holy temple, it literally refers to God's throne, God's palace, right? God's palace. And so that is his approach and direction of his prayer. We have verse 8. Verse 8, those who regard worthless idols forsake their own mercy. This is a bit of a challenge to describe in the English. So let me try. Those who regard, the word regard is to keep, right? Those who give heed would be a good word, right? Give heed, regard, right? Give heed to, I guess this word here, worthless idols. It's not really worthless idols in that sense. It how should we say, it is falsehood, right? It is passing falsehoods, passing emptiness. Now, what does that mean? Figuratively, it does mean idolatry, figuratively. But in this particular aspect, I think it would be more generic, right? You could say those who give heed to worthless or empty, or what else? Or useless things, right? More, I guess I would prefer this to be a broader descriptor. Those who give heed to things that is going to pass away, that has no ultimate value, says that they will forsake. This atzaf, forsake, means to leave, to abandon. They will abandon their own chesed. This word is chesed. But this particular word here really gives a picture of goodness, kindness, etc. And so the words that Jonah is saying is that those people who give heed to things that is going to pass away, that has no ultimate value, is really abandoning the more intrinsic value of life, which is chesed, the goodness and kindness of life. And that would be the more permanent things. So this is actually a contrast, right? Verse 9. But I will sacrifice to you with a voice of thanksgiving. I will pay what I have vowed. Salvation is of the Lord. And let's break this down a little bit. This one, we need to have a bit of time to look at this. The first one is this: I will sacrifice to you with the voice of thanksgiving. And it is really interesting is the first thing it says here, I will sacrifice or make a slaughter. Sacrifice always is associated to a form of slaughtering an animal. And in the case of the Hebrew scripture, it will be a clean animal. And as one offers it to God, he's saying that I will do it with the voice of thanksgiving. The word thanksgiving is todah. Todah. So give thanks to God, todah. And this is very much a, how should you say, an adoration, a confession, and really it's about give thanks. Not just about praise, but give thanks. Why? Because he remembers God and he seeks God, and God is saving him. And he is trusting God to save him. Now he's in the belly of the fish. He knows that he's not going to die at the bottom of the sea. And so knowing that he is going to be rescued, and he is saying all this as an example, I guess, to people like ourselves, that he says, I will pay. Now we need to understand this word. This word is shalem. Means to complete. Now we know the word shalom. That is the result of shalem. When you pay to its completeness, then you have shalom. So paying to completeness is shalem. And what I have vowed, the word vow here is really to make a solemn promise to God. And all promises to God must be fulfilled. Otherwise, don't make it. And so that is the description. So in chapter 1, we read of the sailors making a vow to God. And here, they made a vow and sacrificed to God when the sea had calmed and they know that they are safe. In verse 9 of chapter 2, Jonah, on the other hand, is saying exactly the same thing, that he will do what he has vowed to God and will make a sacrifice with the voice of thanksgiving, because he is now in safe hands, even in the belly of the fish, the duck. And he now understands that he needs to pay attention to things that is of value, that is chesed, that God values as well. And he says, salvation is of the Lord. The word salvation here is Yeshua. Yeshua means God will deliver, right? Deliver. save. And this is really, his life was spared, right? And this is the salvation that belongs to God, to Jehovah. So salvation is of the Lord, literally means salvation that belongs to God. That only God can do this, to save him from the depths of the sea that he is destined to die in the sea and buried there. And yet God had saved him now in the belly of the fish. After this thanksgiving, after this prayer, beseeching God, repenting of what he has done, leaving God, the presence of God, and now seeking the presence of God, he is praying to God, he remembers God, he understands the ultimate value in life is to listen to God, to be faithful to God. And now in verse 10 is the consequence. The Lord, and this is Jehovah. We are reading this narrative. He said something to the dog. Now, the question is this. The idea of say is to say something, basically, right? It is to say something. And it appears that God can speak to the animals too, because he made them, right? In what shape and form, we don't know. But what we do know is that speech is a form of communication. And the fish understood what God said. And it vomited Jonah onto dry land. And so what it means by vomit, vomit means to spew out, right? To spew out. What is inside the stomach, to throw out what was inside the belly. And what was inside the belly was not food. It was Jonah, right? It was Jonah. And it was not anywhere else, but it was in a place called Yabasha, right? Yabasha really literally means a dry place, right? A dry ground. And basically it means not the sea. And that in itself is important. And in the next chapter, we know which part of the dry ground that the fish threw him out onto. Now, one of the interesting things is you can see is that if you notice, the book of Jonah is not just a narrative of history. It is recording it in a very intense imagery. The choice of words in here is very poetic. And that's why in the English, it's sometimes it's kind of hard to explain it in just a few words. So it must be explained in a broader perspective. So I have tried to spend the time to expand the words out for you. And so God can speak to the dog. And remember what I said about dog? It's an animal with a flipping tail. Now, we call a fish today because we have a modern concept of species, but it's an animal. I wouldn't even go to speculate whether it's a gigantic fish or a whale or a shark or whatever. But just know that it is that kind of a semblance of an animal, may not be around anymore, but it is so huge that it can actually swallow a human being like Jonah, right? Like Jonah. And hence, God had control over the sea creatures. And this is one peculiar sea creature that possibly can survive without food for a couple of days, and within which uh, Jonah could stay alive as well within the belly. And in that condition, Jonah's attitude towards God was recalibrated. Now, that whole concept is very similar to the time when God spoke to Job out of a whirlwind, gave him a series of science questions. Where were you when I did all these things? It was to recalibrate Job's attitude and knowledge of God. And in this case, God used this tight spot, literally tight spot that Jonah is in, to recalibrate his knowledge and his attitude towards God. And it was. He repented and he had the right focus in life again in this place where he was almost going to die for sure, but he did not. And he knows that this is really a salvation that can only come from God, not by chance, not circumstantial, but salvation is of the Lord. Salvation that belongs to God. And so in that sense, God realizes this, notices it, and puts an end to this particular discipline, correction, and instruction to Jonah. Sounds something like the book of Proverbs, doesn't it? And so this is the wisdom that has been imparted as an experience to Jonah. And perhaps occasionally we may experience some of these things as well. And with this, we come to the end of chapter 2.